episode of Digital Oil. Today, we're going to be talking about crypto politics and economics. And before I start off the podcast, I want to start talking about the general guiding thoughts. I shared them in the last episode, and I'll just continue to touch on them more so to provide context to listeners so that they understand sort of where I'm coming from, and have that in the back of their minds. So once again, the guiding thoughts are the dollar is backed by nothing. It's not backed by gold, contrary to what a lot of people think. Crypto's main use, what does it do? As a lot of times people say, oh, you can use gold for this, you can use silver for that. What does crypto do? Well, it's essentially, its product is trust and freedom. Something you don't have currently with dollars, something you don't have currently with precious metals. The next thing is, I think we need to continue to focus on trying to measure crypto, not so much in price, but in terms of capability. One of the things you hear me talk a lot about is a digital economy, a trustless digital economy. When you look at concepts like DeFi, which are sort of the next building block in the crypto space to establishing something like a digital economy. And those are capabilities. That's what we need to measure. And we need to focus on the growth and maturity of those capabilities versus just looking at the price in Bitcoin or price in Ethereum or Tezos or Cosmos or Monero or whatever coin or project you like. It's more so not the price, because once again, you're just measuring it in a price that's backed by nothing. That really does not remove you from that sort of, or remove that tether. If your entire goal in crypto is purely just selling it back to an inflated away currency, I don't think that's necessarily the way to look at it. Look at what you can do trustlessly and freely with crypto. So we need to really get back, or start, if we haven't already, measuring things in capabilities. What can you do? The other thing is, the other sort of general thought is tribes and labels limit you. And that's just something I want you to understand, once again, that all across the landscape, everything sort of boils down to tribes and labels. And once you sort of prescribe those or subscribe to those tribes and labels, you're going to sort of lose your individual thought in the process of doing that. And it sort of blocks you, or you limits your ability to get into the details and minutia for why you believe what you believe. And I think you often find that once people label themselves, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, I'm a liberal, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, I'm an Ethereum maximalist. All these sort of labels just really limit the opportunity and the openness that you have in your mind, and it really forces you to stop critically thinking. And sort of the piggyback on that is that choice is often an illusion. And the reason I say that is, once again, tribes and labels are usually down to just two choices. And when you have two choices, and a lot of those times, those choices are really a different face on the same coin, you often understand that choice is an illusion. Avoid debt culture. I think debt culture is really ties a lot of these all together. It ties you back to debt-based society, which is what the dollar is essentially promoting. It ties you back to not being able to make decisions freely. And when you get caught up in that debt culture, you are really sort of limiting yourself on a go-forward basis. So I really, really want people to really start thinking about, what are you doing in your life that promotes the entirety of debt? And when I say debt, listen, I know no one's perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm not saying that you can't use credit cards or you can't buy a house, but think about why you're doing those things and what's your sort of out when you do those things. Are you, do you want to buy a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 house, $600,000 house, whatever house? Do you want to pay on that for 30 years? Are there other options that you can do to eliminate the debt? do you really need that $40,000 car, $50,000 car, whatever, $30,000 car? How much of your choices every day are really related to debt, and how can you sort of start taking steps out of that? And listen, I'm not the expert on that, but I think it's just something to keep in mind. And once again, the other thought is the Fed only causes unnecessary inflation and taxes. If you listen to anybody, whether they like crypto or not, someone like Mike Maloney or Peter Schiff, they may differ on certain things, but a sound economist is going to tell you that everything that the Fed does is going to cause both inflation and or taxes, and that's going to be paid by you. And that debt that you have, you're going to be paying more because of the inflation and taxes. So keep that in mind. And with that, we'll get into what we're going to talk about today. And the first thing that I want to talk about is Ethereum 2.0. And I fundamentally really believe that Ethereum 2.0 is going to deliver a very drastic shift in crypto. I think it's going to sort of break down the barriers of what the industry, if you're looking, I think we're like on year 11, as far as what a mainstream and what a chain or protocol can do. Right now, we've been very sort of locked to whatever Bitcoin's price is and Bitcoin's limited capabilities. And I think that Ethereum's going to be the first one that's going to both increase speed while maintaining enough security and drive a lot of economic capabilities to the forefront and allow the building of that trustless digital economy, which I don't think a lot of people realize that we need. So this article here on Crypto Slate talks about the economic shift that's going to result from that. And really, one of the points they're making is a point that it's a narrative around, onboarding large institutions, and that's going to lead to retail FOMO. Once again, that's a very price-driven sort of perspective on it, but I understand people want to make money. Ultimately, though, I think what you're going to have is, I think people will start to realize as they lose faith in the dollar-based monetary system that we don't need to wait on the institutions to change the way that we conduct business, to change the way that we transact with each other. We have the trustless tools and mechanisms on some chains that enable things like smart contracts, that enable things like oracles, that enable things like some form of governance. And yeah, are they all going to be perfect? No, but the point is there's a lot of experimentation going on. And proof of stake is another sort of iteration of that. Proof of work, I think, was initially sort of the catalyst to get this thing started. But like everything else, I think there's a curve and an adoption, and staking will be sort of the next iteration of that. I'm not saying it's going to be the end all. I'm not saying Ethereum is going to be the end all. But a lot of times until something major occurs, you're not going to realize the potential or possibilities. And I think Ethereum is going to lead the way just because it's the second biggest project. But I think you have a lot of other projects out there that are going to have smart contracts, that are going to have governance, that will make use of oracles, Tezos, and staking as well, Cosmos, Definity. There's a lot of different coins out there. And I'm not going to sit here and chill any specific coin, but just understand that I think we really just have to focus on the fact that Bitcoin is not going to lead the way because it's down to a very limited use case of a store of value, which I don't have it here, but there was even an article about, not that we need the Fed's validation, but they did a whole analysis saying that, the whole store value narrative, first of all, I'll have that in another video. I think the store value narrative is the biggest bunch of bullshit that we have in this space. Store value, if you want to use something as money, we no longer need to separate these principles. You can have store of value and medium of exchange in one unit of account. And the whole idea that we need a store of value similar to the way that we have gold is completely ridiculous. We have to understand now that with the technology and the protocols that we have, we can 100% provide everything, a unit of account, a medium of exchange, and a store of value in one protocol, in one coin natively. And it's only because of Bitcoin's first mover advantage and market cap that it is still being paid attention to in the way that it is. If any coin came to the market today and only delivered a store of value, they'd be laughed out of the room. And those are the facts. So I think we have to start looking forward on coins that are robust and deliver new capabilities for building a digital economy. And we don't need to wait on institutions to drive up the price for us to get interested. I think with everything going on, lack of privacy, lack of capabilities, people are going to soon start looking for alternatives in the space. The next thing I want to talk about is Lightning Network. And the only reason I bring that up is because ever since I got into crypto, and if you're listening to this, more than likely ever since you got into crypto, we've talked about the whole Lightning Network and how we don't need to, Bitcoin doesn't need to change because Lightning Network is going to fix all of that. Fundamentally, I think Lightning Network is very flawed. I think it's overly complicated. I always think of sort of the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. In a Lightning Network with all its channels and everything, seems like every other month there's some article that comes out that says something to the extent that Lightning Network has some sort of a flaw. You can lose your funds. It's insecure. It's not private. So this is a pretty good article that if you're watching the video, where they talk about some analysis that was done on a Lightning Network. And I think that we've got to keep in mind that Lightning Network could eventually work, but we're going to need optionality and we're going to need native transactions on whatever chain we're talking about. And I think when you talk about layer 2, if it's not native, and you have to keep in mind that Lightning Network focuses on what are called IOUs. And so when you're locking up Bitcoin in a Lightning Network channel, you're essentially thus moving back and forth IOUs between, and then you settle out once the channel is closed. I think the entire Lightning Network model is very risky, and even still in that scenario does not enable robust capabilities and mechanisms like you have on things like Ethereum, Tezos, and any platform, what I call a platform cryptocurrency, I think has a chance to succeed in the long run. If you don't support smart contracts, if you don't support governance and oracles, I don't know how you're going to build a digital economy. And I think that this is just another example of just a failed promise for everything that's going on with Lightning Network. So here's an interesting article. It says that crypto payments for child porn grew about a third, unfortunately, in 2019. And they cite Bitcoin and Ethereum. And, they get into some of the details there. You can see this chart. And it's very unfortunate. I'll be the first to say that it's very unfortunate that cryptocurrencies are being used this way. I am 1000% against any form of child porn or utilization, and there's no excuse for it. But at the same time, I think any time that you have mainstream media sources or anyone pointing out that, crypto is used for crime, I think you always have to be able to counter that narrative. Before crypto, it's not like child porn or drugs or anything started 10 years ago or 11 years ago when Bitcoin came on the market. We know that's nonsense. So the reality is that if you look throughout history, what's done the most damage, and that's the dollar. The dollar is still by and large. Yes, crypto might have grown by 32% in 2019, being used for illegal activities as it relates to child porn. At the same time, what about the dollar? The dollar is no better. It is no safer. And I think we have to start really thinking about that narrative about the crime in crypto, because the dollar has been around for hundreds of years or 100 years, however you want to measure it. And we've had all these issues. So I think we have to really start trying to combat that narrative around crime and crypto. I think this could potentially change with, I see the Fed and other central banks that talk about using the digital dollar. And I do think that obviously if the government has something like the digital dollar, or we'll get into a little bit here, even Libra with their coin or their stable coin, they're going to be able to track some of these things. I think that gets into some privacy issues and releases a Pandora's box of other issues. But I do see that if there's a digital dollar or a Libra coin, that using those for child porn or other crimes or drugs are going to be more difficult. But then there's always the trade-off of privacy as well. So we have to keep that in mind. From a politics perspective, I think, everything that's going on right now with the virus, at least in the United States, to me, I see a lot of hypocrisy that's coming forth from the Trump administration. Right now, I've seen a couple different stories about Trump wanting to limit sort of the liability of companies that when their workers contract COVID-19 on the job. I think it's very risky. I'll be the first to say, I know our economy people want to work, people got to get back to work. But the reality is, if you look at it strictly from a logical perspective, in mid-March, Trump declared a national emergency. I think it was maybe March 10th. National emergency. Many states had shut down. And what was our caseload then? How many infections did we have? How many deaths did we have? They were very, very low. I think we may not even have had 100 deaths yet. We may not even have had, but maybe about 1,000 or so infections. Well, here we are today, almost 45,000 deaths. I think almost 800,000 in America alone infections. And now they're talking about opening up the economy, and they want to completely limit liability on companies that put workers in a very bad situation to go to work as essential workers that are underpaid, and then at the same time they can't sue if they're not provided proper PPE, if they're not provided a clean environment. I think it's very bad. It's a very sort of bad precedent that's trying to be set here by the Trump administration. We'll see how far that goes. At the same time, ironically, you have a senator from Tennessee, 2 Republican senators, and listen, I'll be the first to tell you, it just happens to be Republican. The Democratic Party is just as bad as the Republican Party. This time it's 2 Republican parties. That means 2 Republican senators. They want to introduce a bill to sue China for COVID-19. So on one hand, you want to block workers from being able to sue employers. And on the other hand, you want to sue China for COVID-19. And I'll be the first to tell you, China's got a lot of blame here. But I just think the irony is sort of lost on some of these people when they do these things. Next thing I want to talk about is the Federal Reserve. They put out something on April 17th, basically saying they were making a small rule change to the Paycheck Protection Program. If you don't know what the Paycheck Protection Program is essentially the program that part of the stimulus bill, I think it was the second stimulus bill that they had, or third one, I can't remember. I think it was the third one, actually, the large bill, where they allocated small business funds so businesses could retain their employees and pay them their salary or hourly wage and cover operating costs. And I think it's interesting that they make this note here. And really what they're trying to do, and I'll highlight it, is that they're looking to enable bank directors and shareholders of a lending bank to apply for these Paycheck Protection Program loans for their own small businesses. And then they say something to the effect of, to prevent favoritism, it's going to limit the quantity of the loans and this and that. And that's all bullshit. And you know it's bullshit. So this, once again, is just another sort of heist and unfair treatment and priority that the banks and executives have over your average working Joe. They create this rule, which I guess they couldn't do it before, and they slip it in on a Friday afternoon when no one's paying attention at the end of the day, that we're going to let bank directors and shareholders apply for small business loans for the Paycheck Protection Program. So I think that's just more sick abuse by the Fed. It's very disappointing. So we got to keep paying attention to that. The next thing I want to talk about is the fact that when you talk about the Paycheck Protection Program, you have a very sort of sad scenario here, I think, or unfair scenario, where you had a lot of public companies applying for loans through the Paycheck Protection Program. So if you don't know, that program actually ran out because they only allocated, I think, initially like $350 billion for it, while they gave large corporations somewhere on the order of the ability to get $4.25 trillion. So, I mean, when you look at the fact that now public companies who somehow got to the front of the line, who have multiple franchises or are profitable, or, this to me is not the definition of a small business. So, when you look at companies like J. Alexander's, Potbelly, New Age Beverages, Veritone, these are a lot of companies that are doing well, and they've managed to get loans anywhere from $15 to $10 million. And there's a lot of mom and pops out there that are struggling. And I think, once again, you got the Democrats and the Republicans who passed this bill and put in no measures of protection for small businesses. Harvard got, I think, $9 million. Harvard, with their $1 billion endowments. Now, to be fair, Trump today did say that these companies will have to pay them back immediately or return the money. So I think that's fair. But nonetheless, they tried it, right? They tried it. The next thing I want to talk about is, if you were paying any attention, you know that yesterday oil prices, specifically oil futures, were trading in the negatives. I think it got to like negative 40 or maybe negative $37. So what that fundamentally means is that the oil futures for, I think, May and even June now, because with the futures you actually have to take delivery, and because the demand is so low for actual oil and it's not being used, if you have to take delivery for it, you have to have somewhere to store it. So what you saw was not only that oil at the spot price go down to below $1, so it went to zero. I even saw it at one point, some screenshots where it was negative $1, meaning people were paying you to take the oil. The futures, someone was going to pay you $37 in the future on a futures contract to take that oil because they've run out of storage space. And here, once again, we have Trump talking about, the great oil and gas industry. We won't let them down, which means we're going to bail them out, which once again is bullshit. Why are we billing out these industries that are already getting billions in subsidies and made billions in profit? And now we're going to, instead of them using their reserves or using their profits and planning and being responsible, like we're told, Trump says he's directed the Secretary of Treasury, Mnuchin, and the Secretary of Energy, which I can't remember his name, but I know he shouldn't have that job either. He didn't even know what Secretary of Energy did. That they're going to make a plan to give them money. And this is the kind of stuff that people should be really upset about. Once again, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. This is bullshit. Speaking of bullshit, let's talk about United Airlines. So this gets into a conversation I was having with a friend earlier today. United Airlines is one of the 4 major airlines in this country. They said they suffered a $2.1 billion loss. Of course, I believe that that's all true because they are, there's no demand for flights. People aren't flying, whether they don't feel safe. Business isn't being conducted. So they want to receive almost $10 billion under the CARE Act. Now, to me, when you're talking about four airlines, I think you have a sort of pseudo monopoly of sorts. You don't really have much choice between United, Delta, Southwest, and American. I think all these airlines that are getting bailout money, United States, instead of just giving them a loan, we should get equity in them. Because you're one of the things that we need to start talking about as a society, especially American society, is where's the line between shared services and public utilities? If United Airlines, and I'll even add Boeing to that, are too big to fail, if we've got to bail out Boeing and we've got to bail out the airlines, let them fail and maintain a true sort of operation of capitalism. Don't give them any money. Let them file bankruptcy and let someone else step up, buy them, liquidate whatever they need to do. Planes will still fly. We'll be fine. But if we're going to give them money, United States people, Americans, the public should have an equity stake in United Airlines. That's how it should work at minimum. And we can't accept anything less than that. So that's something I'm going to talk more about when you talk about public utilities, shared services, and sort of where that line is and how we need to start thinking about that line as a country. And the last thing I wanted to talk about from sort of today's news, I saw this interesting article about restaurants versus insurers. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is I think you have two big lobbying groups and I saw the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is definitely involved in this, and they're one of the largest, if not the largest lobbying group in the country. And one of the things that we're seeing is there's this battle around the restaurants. Some of them have very specific claims for business disruption or business interruption. And because the states and the president declared states of emergencies, the insurance companies are pushing back to say that they shouldn't have to pay the claims because this wasn't a pandemic, but a government sort of triggered action or triggered issue. Not the pandemic caused it, but the governments caused it. So there's going to be this whole battle between large entities and the restaurants and insurers. And I think this is sort of just, I've seen reports about insurance companies that are going to need bailouts and things like that. And I think it's really sort of tragic that we're in a world where insurers, which are supposed to be insurance, or you get insurance to, cover sort of freak event or in case shit happens. And now we're seeing this fight where I guarantee you if the insurance companies lose this fight, they're going to very quickly want to get bailed out. That's for sure going to happen. So we should continue to watch how this battle plays out. If the restaurants are able to submit and get their business interruption claims paid, I think you're going to see a lot of insurance companies demand bailouts. So, which to me, the insurance companies needing bailouts, I think is just ironic and sick at the same time. So let's make sure to keep a lookout for that. So today I want to talk about the three types of money that I view that are out there or going to soon be out there. The first one, well, let me list them all out for you. The three are government money, and that's the dollar, the euro, the yuan, or whatever sort of central bank issued currency. There's corporate money, and that's where you have like Facebook Libra, and that isn't out there, but it's in the process of, and I think eventually whether they do it with Facebook Libra, some people would even qualify like airline miles as money. Depends on how loose your definition of money is. Or public money. And by public money, that's where I fit in crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, what have you. And when you really think about what money is, it really comes down to a group of individuals who have the confidence to believe that something can be used as money. If you look throughout history, money has been rocks, it's been different sort of metals, and really it just came down to a group of people who have confidence in that system. And as technology has evolved and capabilities have evolved, one of the things that crypto has enabled is for us to look at money very differently than we ever have before. And I'll have another video on this in the future, or a discussion on it, is the whole concept of gold as money. I think it's a very archaic sort of model. I think it's an old way of thinking things. It's one of those things, well, we've done this before, so we're going to continue doing it in the future. You know that past results are not necessarily an indication of future results. So when I talk about government money, what are the pros and cons of that? Well, obviously, government money has the huge benefit of existing infrastructure and public buy-in. That's what we've always used. Anybody alive today is always, probably 99.99% of people alive today, especially in America, have always used the dollar as money. So the existing infrastructure is there, and there's a lot of, when I say public buy-in, that's the confidence in it, right? But the downsides of late, and I'd say since 1971 at least, since we got off the gold standard, are very bad. And I think we're quickly approaching a scenario where government money and the confidence in it is going to get lost. As soon as some very large macro things play out with, for instance, dollar-denominated debt, and just the entire idea that a lot of other countries value the dollar, it's the cleanest shirt, or it's the least dirty shirt in a hamper of crappy shirts. I think when that plays out, you ultimately have a loss of confidence in central bank money, and that includes the Fed, which is sort of the central bank of all central banks. There's no transparency provided for government money. It's very power focused, those in charge. There's no sort of opportunity for anyone else to give any input. Trillions is printed out in a sort of small group of people. I think there's 9 governors, 12 governors, 13 governors in the central bank. What is that? So it's very power focused. It's not sound money. And what I mean by when I say that is, there's no rhyme or reason to the monetary policy that government money runs by. It runs by political influence. It runs by corruption. And I think people will slowly but surely start to lose confidence in that. And eventually, government's money is going to be centrable. And what I mean by that is, once the dollar is digital, or once the ruble is digital, it doesn't really matter which central bank, they're going to be able to tie that, your ability to use that, to your person. And they'll be able to censor your transactions. They'll be able to control what you can or can't buy. And I think that's very limiting. And that goes, once again, it goes against our trust and freedom. So the government system of the dollar, fiat, as many people call it, is just really wrapped around power, corruption, and control. So what are the alternatives to that? Well, obviously, there's what Facebook is working on with Libra. The benefits is they could provide a much better user experience. They can more easier onboard customers or users of that currency. There's existing infrastructure. Something like Facebook itself is massive infrastructure. But really, it presents the same problems as does government money. There's no transparency. There's no guarantee it's going to be sound money. It requires you to trust the company instead of the government, which to me is no different at this point, especially today when our politics are dominated by corporations and their ability to influence government to get what they want to get. So the corporations influence government to maintain their power, and then that power gives them the ability to influence government and maintain their power. So it's a very sick, vicious cycle, right? So I think corporate money at some point is going to sort of land onshore, and we'll have to really start thinking about what that looks like. But you better believe they're going to easily censor you. You better believe that they're going to be working hand in hand with the government. And you better believe they're going to have the same sort of power and control, maybe even more because of their ability to influence the government from a regulatory perspective. And that is no guarantee for your freedom and for your trust in the system. They could just as easily create more coins without notifying anyone. And once again, a very small group of people can make that decision. And that brings me to public money. And I think that's the way or even community money. I don't like the word community. It's a negative connotation for some people. But ultimately, public money like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, Litecoin, whatever. Why do I call it public money? Because anyone can get involved. It's uncensorable. It's community driven. And by community, I mean network effect. You can choose or not choose to use something. The transparency is there. Transactions are there, right? So when you're talking about public money, crypto, I think the only thing we're missing is the existing infrastructure and the confidence that this fairer, more transparent money can be used as money. I think it's going to take a cultural change, not just nationally, but globally. I think it's going to take a loss of confidence in the dollar and corporate money. And I think once the infrastructure and the payment rails get there to get onboarded to these new digital economies, I think people will find that they like operating with the transparency and at the same time with the privacy, working with uncensorable money, working with multiple coins. See, I'm not a maximalist. I don't think any one coin is going to quote unquote win crypto. I think you're going to have some communities across the globe that are borderless and say, you can have 10,000 people that believe, Hope Coin has some value to them. They can see the transactions on the blockchain. They can maintain their privacy. Maybe it's a token on Tezos or a token on Ethereum. But I think we're going to be able to create trustless public economies where you have the transparency to that provide you really, really robust capabilities for a lower barrier of entry, a lower cost of operating that the public's going to really buy into. I think we're just on the early stages of that. So you really have to start looking at money in this sort of sense of government, corporate, and public money. And I think public money is going to really revolutionize and change our society. And I don't even know if it's going to be Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Monero. It could be something else that hasn't even been started yet. But we're going to iterate over this, and it won't be perfect. But I can tell you that anything out there now, any major coin that's out there now, is better than the dollar, is better than Libra, because it offers you freedom and trust. And when I say trust, it's not that it's going to be pure or bad things won't happen. But when something bad happens, you'll know it. You'll see it. Because of the transparency that's on the blockchain. Because anyone can audit the code. The code is open source. Code is going to deliver you more trust than any central bank could ever do or any corporation could ever do. So keep that in mind, that this is really, we're slowly but surely approaching a battle that's going to essentially be between government money, corporate money, and public money. And that right now, from a capability perspective, right now from a trust perspective, right now from a privacy perspective, and right now from a future-proof perspective, something new is that public money, cryptocurrency, is going to be the only thing that gives us a shot at a more robust, more fair, more transparent, more powerful economy that's going to remove the old guard and replace their power and allow us to create economies that are truly free market driven. At the same time, allow us to function as a fair community to get certain things done that we find value as different cross-section communities. So keep that in mind. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I'll talk to you next time.